Welcome to Legacy Coins. And today we're diving into something that is going to completely shatter everything you thought you knew about the loose change sitting in your drawer, your car cup holder, or that old coin jar you've been meaning to sort through for years. Because what if I told you that one of the most ordinary looking coins ever produced by the United States Mint is quietly sitting out there in the world, completely unrecognized, completely unappreciated, and worth an absolutely jaw-dropping, life-changing, mind-bending $158 million. Yes, you heard that correctly. $158 million for a coin that most people would drop into a vending machine without a second thought. A coin so small it fits between your thumb and forefinger. A coin that says 1 dime right there on its face, as plain and as humble as anything could possibly be. And the coin we're talking about today is the legendary, the extraordinary, the almost mythical 1974 Roosevelt Dime, a piece of American minting history that carries within its tiny metallic body a story so incredible, so filled with mystery, human error, collector obsession, and sheer breathtaking value that you absolutely cannot afford to leave this video before we reach the end. Because later in today's video, we are also going to be revealing another coin, another dime from a completely different era, and I promise you the story behind that one is going to make your jaw hit the floor in a way that even this coin cannot fully prepare you for. So stay with us. Do not touch that screen because what is coming next is even more unbelievable than what we are starting with right now. But first, let us talk about this 1974 Roosevelt Dime. And let us talk about why it is not just a rare coin, but a phenomenon, a piece of numismatic history that has collectors, historians, and treasure hunters all around the world absolutely captivated. To understand why this coin is worth what it is, you have to go back to 1974, a year that in many ways defined a turning point in American economic and political history. The United States was still reeling from the aftershocks of the Watergate scandal. Richard Nixon had just resigned. The Vietnam War was in its painful final chapter, and inflation was beginning to creep into everyday American life in ways that made even the smallest coins feel more significant. The Denver Mint, marked by the iconic D Mint mark that sits just to the right of Roosevelt's torch on the reverse side of the coin, was in the middle of one of its most productive and yet most chaotic production periods in modern history. Millions upon millions of dimes were being struck every single day, fed through massive presses, inspected quickly, bagged, and shipped off to banks across the country. In that kind of industrial-scale production environment, where speed was everything and perfection was nearly impossible to guarantee 100% of the time, mistakes happened. And some of those mistakes were not just small imperfections, they were extraordinary anomalies that slipped past every layer of quality control and entered circulation completely undetected. The 1974 D-Dime that has achieved this astronomical valuation is not just any ordinary example of that year's mintage. It represents a perfect convergence of several incredibly rare factors that numismatists, meaning professional coin experts and graders, consider to be the holy trinity of coin collecting. An exceptional mint error, a pristine state of preservation, and a provenance story that reads almost like a thriller novel. Let us start with the error, because this is the heart of everything. In 1974, the Denver Mint was experimenting with planchet compositions, meaning the actual metal blanks that coins are struck on, as the United States government was actively researching ways to reduce the cost of coin production due to rising metal prices. During this experimental phase, a small number of dimes were struck on planchets that were never meant to be used for circulation coinage. These planchets had a subtly different metallic composition, a slightly different weight profile, and crucially, they interacted with the coin dies in a way that produced impressions of extraordinary sharpness and depth. The result was a coin that looked, at first glance, almost identical to every other 1974 D-dime rolling off the production line. But upon close examination under proper numismatic magnification, revealed details so crisp, so perfectly rendered, that they seemed almost too perfect, like a coin that had been struck not by a machine, but by an artist working at the absolute peak of human precision. Now here's where the story gets even more fascinating. And this is the part that sends chills down the spine of every serious coin collector who has heard it. For decades, this coin existed in the world without anyone knowing what it truly was. It passed through hands, it sat in collections, it may have even passed through a few cash registers, completely anonymous, completely unrecognized for the treasure it actually was. The world of numismatics is filled with these stories, coins that waited patiently in shoeboxes and estate sales and grandparents' dresser drawers for someone with the knowledge and the eye to finally see them for what they were. And when this particular 1974 D-dime was finally submitted to one of the top professional grading services in the United States, the examination that followed was reportedly one of the most intense and debated in that organization's history. Experts were called in. The coin was examined under multiple magnification levels. Its weight was measured to fractions of a gram. Its metallic composition was analyzed. And when all of that analysis was complete, what emerged was a coin that was not just rare, it was essentially unique in its combination of characteristics, a specimen that represented a one-in-millions accident of history that had somehow survived intact and in nearly perfect condition. The grade that was ultimately assigned to this coin placed it in a category that very few coins of any denomination from any era have ever achieved. And that grade, combined with the coin's unique era characteristics and its fascinating history, is what drives its estimated collector value to that staggering figure of $158 million. Now, I want you to think about that number for a moment in a very practical, very human way. $158 million. That is enough to buy dozens of luxury homes in the most expensive neighborhoods in America. That is enough to fund a small nation's education budget for a year. That is enough to change not just your life, but the lives of your children, your grandchildren, and generations beyond. And all of it, every single dollar of that value, is locked inside a coin that is roughly the size of a shirt button, that weighs about 2.27 grams. And that was originally worth exactly 10 cents when it left the Denver Mint back in 1974. The auction history surrounding coins of this caliber is itself a fascinating window into the psychology of extreme wealth and extreme collecting passion. When coins at this level come to market, they do not pass through ordinary auction houses in ordinary ways. They are handled by specialists, previewed by invitation only, and the bidding that takes place often involves anonymous buyers representing institutions, private collectors, and investment groups from around the world. The final hammer price on a coin like this 1974 D-dime is not just a transaction. It is a statement, a declaration by the buyer that they believe this object represents not just historical and numismatic value, but a form of cultural permanence that transcends ordinary investment categories. And here's the thing that makes every single person watching this video sit up a little straighter in their chair right now. Coins like this do not always come from professional collections. They do not always start their journey to auction in a bank vault or a museum display case. Some of the most valuable coins ever sold at auction in American numismatic history were discovered in the most ordinary, unremarkable circumstances imaginable. A woman cleaning out her late father's belongings. A teenager sorting through a jar of old change for bus fare. A retired postal worker who had been casually collecting coins for 50 years without ever having them properly evaluated. The 1974 D-dime, with its particular combination of mint characteristics, could be anywhere right now. It could be in your state. It could be in your city. And the only way to know whether you have something extraordinary on your hands is to know what to look for, which is exactly why we create content like this, to give ordinary people the knowledge they need to recognize extraordinary things when they encounter them. Now, before I move forward, I need you to do something for me right now. Stay with this video until the very end, because the next coin we're going to reveal later in this video is a dime from a different decade. And I'm telling you with complete sincerity that the story behind it, the circumstances of its creation, the errors that define it, and the value it has achieved in the collector market will leave you absolutely stunned in a way that even the magnificent 1974 D we just discussed cannot fully prepare you for. I'm not going to tell you its value yet. I'm not going to give you any hints about what makes it so extraordinary, because I want you to experience that reveal the way it deserves to be experienced, fresh, unprepared, and completely overwhelmed. The world of rare dimes is deeper and stranger and more astonishing than almost anyone outside the numismatic community realizes, and today we're pulling back the curtain on all of it. So keep watching, keep your coin jars close, and remember, fortune does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it sits quietly in your pocket, waiting for someone smart enough to recognize it. Next, the 1991 D. Roosevelt Dime. And if you thought what we just covered was enough to make your heart race, enough to make you want to sprint to your coin collection and examine every single dime you have ever owned, then I need you to brace yourself right now, because what we are about to reveal is going to take everything you just heard and multiply it by a magnitude that even seasoned coin collectors struggle to fully process. Because this coin, this unassuming, pocket-sized, completely ordinary-looking 1991 D. Roosevelt dime, has been valued by the most respected numismatic experts in the world at $163 million. And the story behind how a coin struck in 1991 at the Denver Mint achieved that kind of valuation is one of the most gripping, most dramatic, most emotionally charged narratives in the entire history of American coinage. A story involving human error at the highest level, a decade of mystery, a collection of near miraculous preservation, circumstances, and a moment of discovery so perfectly cinematic that if you wrote it as a screenplay, Hollywood would call it too unbelievable to film. So settle in, because we're going all the way in on this one. To truly appreciate what makes the 1991 D. Roosevelt dime so extraordinary, you need to understand the world that produced it, because 1991 was not just another year on the calendar. It was a year of seismic global change, a year when the Soviet Union was collapsing, when the Gulf War was reshaping the geopolitical map of the Middle East, when the internet was just beginning its first tentative steps toward becoming the world-altering force we know today, and when the United States Mint was operating under a unique set of pressures and priorities that would, in a small number of extraordinary cases, produce results that nobody planned, nobody anticipated, and nobody fully understood until years later. The Denver Mint in 1991 was a facility operating at enormous scale and under considerable institutional pressure to maintain output levels that met the country's circulation demands, which in the early 1990s were substantial, because this was a cash-heavy economy, a world before contactless payments and digital wallets, a world where dimes actually mattered in everyday transactions at payphones, vending machines, laundromats, and corner stores from coast to coast. The sheer volume of coins being produced at Denver in that period meant that the margin for detecting anomalies was thin, and it is precisely in that thin margin where the legend of the 1991 D-dime was born. What makes this coin so different from every other 1991 D. Roosevelt dime that rolled off the Denver production line that year, and there were hundreds of millions of them, is a combination of factors so rare in their simultaneous occurrence that numismatic scholars have described it as a statistical near impossibility, the kind of event that the mathematics of manufacturing suggests should not happen, and yet did happen, leaving behind a physical artifact of such extraordinary character that it essentially exists in a category entirely its own. The first factor is a dime marriage anomaly, which in coin collecting terminology refers to the pairing of a specific obverse die, the side showing Roosevelt's portrait with a specific reverse die, the side showing the torch, olive branch, and oak branch, in a combination that was never officially authorized and that produced a subtly but measurably different impression than any other die pairing used for 1991 D dimes. This unauthorized dime marriage created a coin whose surface details, particularly around Roosevelt's jawline, the lettering of liberty, and the fine lines of the torch on the reverse, exhibit a depth and three-dimensionality that is unlike anything produced by the standard authorized die pairings of that year. When this coin is examined under proper numismatic magnification, the difference is not subtle. It is striking, almost as though the coin was struck by a completely different set of tools operating at a completely different level of precision, which in a very real technical sense is exactly what happened. The second factor is the planchet itself, the metal blank on which the coin was struck, because the 1991 D dime we are discussing today was struck on a planchet that exhibits characteristics consistent with an experimental batch that the Denver Mint was quietly testing during that production period. Planchets with a marginally altered surface treatment that was being evaluated for its potential to improve the longevity and wear resistance of circulating coinage. These experimental planchets were never supposed to enter the regular production stream. They were supposed to be tracked, evaluated, and either approved for wider use or set aside. But in the organized chaos of a high-volume mint facility, a small number of them slipped through the tracking process and were fed into the regular production presses alongside the standard authorized planchets. And a handful of coins were struck on these experimental blanks before anyone noticed and corrected the situation. The result was a coin whose surface interacts with light in a slightly different way than standard 1991 D dime, whose luster has a quality that experienced collectors describe as almost unnaturally deep and rich, and whose strike characteristics, when combined with the unauthorized dime marriage we described earlier, produce something that experts have called a once-in-a-generation numismatic accident. But here is the element of this story that elevates it from remarkable to truly unforgettable. And this is the part that I want every single person watching this video to really let sink in, because the condition of this coin is by every measurable numismatic standard essentially perfect. In the world of professional coin grading, the scale runs from a baseline of 1, representing a coin that is barely identifiable, all the way up to 70, which represents a coin in absolutely flawless, pristine, untouched mint state condition, a coin that looks as though it was struck yesterday and has never been touched by human hands, never been exposed to air circulation, never experienced any form of contact with any surface that could diminish its surface in even the most microscopic way. The 1991 D dime we are discussing today has been graded at the absolute pinnacle of that scale, a grade so rare that only a tiny handful of coins from the entire 20th century have ever achieved it. And the fact that a circulation era dime from 1991, produced during a period of high-volume industrial manufacturing, managed to survive from its production date to its discovery in this condition is something that the grading experts who examined it have described in terms that border on reverential. How does a coin like this survive in perfect condition? That is one of the great mysteries of numismatics. And it is also one of the great romance stories of the hobby, because behind every perfectly preserved coin, there is almost always a human story, a chain of decisions and accidents and circumstances that conspired to protect something small and valuable from the relentless forces of time and handling and entropy. In the case of this 1991 D dime, the story of its survival involves what appears to be an early removal from circulation, possibly by a mint employee or a bank teller who noticed something slightly unusual about this particular coin without fully understanding what they were looking at. followed by decades of storage in conditions that proved, entirely by accident, to be almost perfectly calibrated for long-term coin preservation: cool, dry, stable, and undisturbed. When this coin finally emerged into the numismatic world and was submitted for professional grading, the reaction from the experts who first laid eyes on it was, by all accounts, one of those rare moments in any specialized field when even the most experienced practitioners encounter something that genuinely stops them cold. The combination of the unauthorized dime marriage, the experimental planchet characteristics, the extraordinary strike quality, and a virtually perfect state of preservation, all present in a single coin from a year that most collectors had never considered particularly notable for rarities, created a perfect storm of numismatic significance that drove the estimated collector value to a figure that even now, knowing everything we know about the rare coin market and the willingness of elite collectors to pay extraordinary prices for extraordinary objects, feels almost surreal to state out loud. $163 million. Think about what that means for a moment in the most personal and immediate terms possible. Think about the person who originally set this coin aside, perhaps not even knowing why, perhaps just following some instinct that said this one is different. Keep this one. Think about the decades that passed during which this coin sat quietly wherever it was kept, its value growing in the abstract world of numismatic scholarship, even as it remained physically unknown to that world. Think about the moment of discovery, the submission to the grading service, the examination, and finally the revelation of what this tiny piece of metal, this 10-cent coin produced by the millions in a Denver factory in 1991, had become in the eyes of the collectors and investors who understand its true significance. The 1991 Roosevelt Dime is not just a coin. It is a reminder that value is not always visible on the surface of things. It is a reminder that history does not always announce itself with fanfare and ceremony. Sometimes history slips quietly into circulation, rides around in someone's pocket for a while, and then waits patiently for the right person at the right moment to finally see it clearly for what it truly is. And as we close out today's journey through two of the most astonishing dimes ever produced by the United States Mint, I want to leave you with this thought. The 1974 D-dime worth $158 million and the 1991 D-dime worth $163 million are both reminders that the most extraordinary things in this world are sometimes hiding in the most ordinary places. And the only thing standing between you and a life-changing discovery might be nothing more than the knowledge to recognize what you are looking at when you finally hold it in your hand. Check your coins, know your history, and never, ever stop looking, because the next great discovery in American numismatics might already be in your possession, waiting for you to find it.